It's the spring of 2022, and we're in a small suburban neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. The cherry blossoms are just starting to bloom, casting a soft, rosy hue over the town. Things seem peaceful on the outside, but behind the calm facade, the Buckley family is about to face a storm that'll tear everything apart. Ryan Buckley, a 34-year-old husband, father, and a guy who's honestly trying to make a good life for his family, works as an architect at a small firm. He's good at what he does. He's built a solid reputation, and his colleagues respect him. On paper, his life is pretty close to perfect. He's married to Rebecca, a high school teacher, who's also deeply involved in the community. Together, they have a 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, who lights up every room she enters with her infectious giggle. Ryan and Rebecca have been together for 10 years now, and for most of that time, everything's been smooth sailing. They're the type of couple everyone else looks at and says, goals. They go on weekend hikes, have dinner with friends, and laugh about the little things. They've even built a lovely home together, tucked away in the quietest corner of Portland, with a sprawling backyard and a white picket fence. It's one of those places where you imagine the perfect little family growing old and gray, and it's exactly what Ryan wanted. But here's the thing, even the perfect families have secrets. And it's these secrets that are about to unravel everything Ryan has ever known. Now let's talk about Rebecca Buckley. She's beautiful, confident, and driven. She's been teaching English for years, and anyone who's ever met her will tell you she's got this magnetic energy about her. People love her. She's the kind of woman who shows up at every PTA meeting, bakes cookies for the bake sale, and is always the first to lend a hand when anyone needs help. To everyone around them, Ryan and Rebecca seem like the perfect couple. But Ryan has started noticing small things lately, little signs that something is off. The late nights at work, the unexplained trips, the way Rebecca has become more distant. At first, it was easy to brush it off as nothing. Rebecca's busy with her students, her responsibilities, and the pressure that comes with being a high school teacher. Ryan understood. After all, he's no stranger to stress himself. But then, those small signs started adding up. Ryan had never been the jealous type. He trusted Rebecca completely, or at least that's what he thought. But a few weeks ago, he noticed something strange. A message popped up on Rebecca's phone while she was in the kitchen making dinner. She quickly turned it face down, a habit she'd never had before. It was a small thing, but it caught Ryan off guard. Then there was the sudden spike in her work hours. She'd started staying late at school for no apparent reason. When he asked her about it, she seemed irritated, brushing him off with an explanation about prepping for final exams. It wasn't like her to be short with him, especially when it came to something as trivial as a question about her schedule. Still, Ryan kept pushing the thoughts to the back of his mind. Could be nothing. After all, everything else about their life was perfect, right? One Friday night, after another long week at work, Ryan came home late to find the house unusually quiet. Rebecca's car was parked in the driveway, but there was no sign of her. Sophie was already in bed, tucked in and sound asleep. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Out with the girls. Back late. Love you." Ryan didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't unusual for Rebecca to have a night out with her friends. But as he set down his bag and started to unwind, something gnawed at him. The feeling grew stronger when he checked the time. It was well past midnight, and Rebecca still wasn't home. Ryan went to bed, hoping she'd be back soon. But as he lay there, he found himself staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was just a gut feeling, but he couldn't ignore the nagging thought that had crept into his mind. Is she hiding something from me? The next morning, Rebecca came home just as Ryan was finishing his coffee. She was quiet, as though something had been weighing on her mind. She didn't even greet him properly, just a quick kiss on the cheek and a tired smile. It was subtle, but Ryan noticed. She didn't look like herself. Something was off. "So, how was the night?" Ryan asked, trying to keep things light. He didn't want to accuse her of anything, not without knowing for sure. But the unease was eating at him. "Fine," she replied, her voice distant. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. "I'm just so tired. It's been a long week." Ryan nodded, but inside, something felt off. He couldn't quite place it, but he was beginning to feel like he was being shut out of her life in ways that didn't make sense. She hadn't even mentioned what she'd done with her friends, which wasn't like her. Later that afternoon, while Rebecca was out running errands, Ryan decided to go through some old family photos that had been tucked away in a box. He had no real reason for it, just a desire to reminisce. He wasn't expecting to find anything that would make him question his marriage. But as he flipped through a stack of photos, something caught his eye. A picture of Rebecca, her arm around a man he didn't recognize. It wasn't the man's face that struck him. It was the way Rebecca looked in the photo. She was laughing, her face full of life, with a kind of intimacy that was reserved for only the closest people. Ryan stared at the photo, trying to make sense of it. Who was this guy? And why had Rebecca never mentioned him? His heart began to race. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were closing in on him. Was this a clue? Or just another random photo from a party? Ryan decided to wait until Rebecca came home to ask. But when she did, he didn't bring it up. Instead, he kept the photo to himself, letting his suspicions simmer quietly beneath the surface. As the days went by, things only seemed to get more tense between them. Ryan tried to ignore it, to brush it off. But every time Rebecca would leave the house, a little voice in his head would wonder where she was going. And when she came home, there was always a little too much of a hurry to get to bed, a little too much of a distraction. Then one day things changed. Ryan received an anonymous message. It was brief but direct. I saw Rebecca with another man last night. I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's true. Ryan's stomach churned. His heart sank as his fingers hovered over the screen. Was this a prank? A misunderstanding? Or had he been right all along? Was there something more going on behind his back? Ryan sat in his car outside his house, staring at his phone screen. The message was still there, taunting him. I saw Rebecca with another man last night. I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's true. His hands were trembling slightly as he read and reread the words, as though they might change if he looked at them long enough. But they didn't. The message was clear. He needed to confront her. But how? The last thing he wanted was to blow everything up based on a text from an anonymous number. For all he knew, it could be someone trying to mess with him. Yet, the unease had been building in him for weeks, and now, it felt like his worst fears were finally coming true. Ryan took a deep breath and made his way inside. Rebecca was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, just like she did most nights. The smell of garlic and onions filled the air as she hummed softly to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing in Ryan's mind. Hey, babe, he said, trying to keep his voice casual as he set down his briefcase. Rebecca turned, her warm smile greeting him as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. Hey, how was work? She asked, but Ryan could see the way her eyes quickly flicked to his phone. Something about her reaction felt off. Too quick, like she was trying to hide something. He noticed she was still wearing the same dress from earlier, the one he didn't remember seeing her wear before. Work was fine, Ryan replied, watching her carefully. How was your day? It was good. Just busy. You know, final exams are coming up, she said, her voice distracted as she returned to stirring the sauce. Ryan watched her for a moment, his mind racing. He wanted to ask her about the message, about the other man, but the words were stuck in his throat. This wasn't a simple conversation. This was something that could break everything. So, he started cautiously, what did you get up to last night? Rebecca paused, the spoon hanging in midair. For a moment, the kitchen was eerily silent. Then her eyes flicked to him, her expression shifting slightly. Just out with the girls, like I said. Why? Ryan felt a sharp twinge in his chest. That was the third time she had mentioned being out with the girls. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it was a cover. You know, I've been thinking, he began, trying to keep his voice steady. I've noticed you've been out a lot lately, and you don't usually mention who you're with. So, I was wondering, is everything okay? Rebecca looked at him, her smile faltering for just a split second. She put the spoon down and crossed her arms. I told you, Ryan, everything's fine. I'm just busy with school. You're acting kind of paranoid, don't you think? Ryan's heart was pounding. He could feel the knot tightening in his stomach, but he couldn't back down now. "Rebecca, I got a message last night," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Someone saw you with another man. They said you were with him last night." Rebecca froze. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she looked completely caught off guard. Her eyes darted away from him, and Ryan could see the way she clenched her fists at her sides. "What? What do you mean? Who said that?" Ryan didn't flinch. He had to stay calm. "I don't know who it was, but it doesn't really matter, does it? What matters is that you're hiding something from me." Rebecca let out a long sigh, her shoulders sagging as she turned away from him. "Ryan, I'm not hiding anything from you," she said quietly, but there was a definite edge to her voice now. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I swear to you, I've done nothing wrong." Ryan's pulse was racing, but he couldn't help himself. "Then why are you acting like this? Why are you acting like you have something to hide?" Rebecca's face darkened. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, her voice rising. "I don't need to explain myself to you. You don't trust me anymore, and frankly, I don't know how to fix that." Ryan stood there, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him. He had never seen her like this. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted for years, was now turning on him. He had asked a simple question, and instead of an answer, he was getting anger and defensiveness. It didn't make sense. But just as quickly as the tension had risen, Rebecca turned back to the stove, her posture stiff and distant. "I'm not going to keep doing this," she muttered. "I'm tired, Ryan. Just drop it." That was the moment Ryan realized that something much deeper was happening here. Rebecca was shutting him out, and that wasn't just about her schedule or work stress anymore. He had touched a nerve. But why? What was she hiding? He didn't know how to proceed, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back down now. He had to find out the truth, even if it destroyed him. Over the next few days, Ryan's mind never stopped racing. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was a pattern in Rebecca's behavior that he couldn't ignore. Her phone was always face down. She never answered his calls when she was out with friends. She was coming home later and later with vague excuses. The inconsistencies were mounting, and he couldn't pretend they didn't matter anymore. At work, Ryan found it hard to focus. His clients noticed his distracted mood, and he could barely keep up with the design projects on his desk. But he wasn't thinking about architecture anymore. He was thinking about Rebecca. Was she cheating on him? Was the life they'd built together, the one he thought was perfect, all a lie? The worst part was that Rebecca wasn't just distant. She was defensive, almost hostile. Every time Ryan tried to ask questions, she'd brush him off with anger. But every now and then, when he caught her off guard, he saw something in her eyes. Something that wasn't fear, but guilt. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Ryan decided to take a deeper look at Rebecca's phone. He knew it was wrong, but at this point he didn't care. He couldn't keep living with this uncertainty. He picked up her phone from the counter while Rebecca was in the bathroom. His hands shook as he unlocked it and scrolled through her messages. Most of them were work-related, but as he dug deeper, he found something that made his blood run cold. There, buried in the middle of a string of text messages, was a conversation that made everything else pale in comparison. Rebecca had been texting someone named Adam for weeks. The messages were flirty, full of inside jokes and shared memories. And then, there it was, clear as day. "I can't wait to see you tonight. Feels like forever." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a friendly conversation. This was an affair. Now, before I go further, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. Stay tuned for the next part of this roller coaster ride as Ryan goes deeper into the rabbit hole to uncover the truth and the devastating consequences that follow. Ryan sat in the living room, staring at Rebecca's phone in his hands. His heart was pounding, every muscle in his body tense. The text messages from Adam were clear, too clear to ignore. He could feel his stomach twisting into knots, and the air in the room suddenly felt too thick to breathe. This wasn't just a random fling or a brief affair. This was something deep, something Rebecca had been hiding from him for a long time. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His wife, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, had been betraying him. And now he had the evidence in his hands. He wanted to confront her right then and there, demand answers, but something inside him stopped him. He didn't know if he was ready for the full truth, but more importantly, he didn't know if she was. What if she broke? What if everything fell apart in that instant? Ryan wasn't sure if he could handle it, but deep down, he knew there was no turning back. The door creaked open behind him. Rebecca stepped into the room, her eyes immediately finding the phone in Ryan's hand. She froze. "Ryan," she began, her voice trembling, but she didn't need to finish the sentence. He already knew everything. "Who's Adam?" Ryan's voice was cold, sharper than he intended, but he couldn't help it. The anger, the pain, the disbelief, it was all bubbling to the surface. Rebecca's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Ryan could see the tears welling up in her eyes, the guilt written all over her face. She knew there was no way out of this one. "How long, Rebecca?" Ryan's voice cracked slightly, the words bitter on his tongue. "How long have you been seeing him behind my back?" Rebecca shook her head, taking a step back. I didn't mean for it to happen, Ryan. It just did." Ryan stood up, the anger surging through him. "It just did? You've been lying to me for months. You've been hiding this from me, and now you expect me to believe that." Rebecca broke down, tears streaming down her face.
"I'm sorry.
"I never meant to hurt you. It wasn't supposed to go this far. But I'm not happy anymore. I haven't been for a while." Ryan's chest tightened. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about everything he thought they had, everything they had built together. "You've been unhappy? All this time?" His voice was barely a whisper, the disbelief still fresh. "And you couldn't come to me? You couldn't talk to me?" Rebecca sank into the couch, her hands covering her face. "I didn't know how to. I was scared, Ryan. I didn't know how to tell you. It was easier to just pretend everything was fine." Ryan took a step back, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about years of trust shattered, years of pretending everything was perfect when it wasn't. Rebecca's words cut through him like a knife, and the pain of it was overwhelming. But as much as it hurt, Ryan knew he needed more. He couldn't just accept an apology and move on. "You owe me more than this," he said firmly. "You owe me the truth. All of it." Rebecca looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean?" Ryan took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "I want to know everything. All of it. From the beginning." Rebecca bit her lip, hesitating. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a shaky breath, she began. "Adam, he's someone I met at work. He was a new teacher and we started talking. First, it was nothing, just work stuff. But then, I don't know, we started getting closer. And one night, we had a few drinks, and it just happened." Ryan listened, his mind racing as the pieces fell into place. "How long has this been going on?" "Almost 6 months," Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to go this far. But he was different, Ryan. He was the kind of person I could talk to, and I felt seen." Ryan was reeling. 6 months. That was half a year of lying, of betrayal, of knowing his wife was in someone else's arms while he worked late nights or took care of Sophie. The thought of it made him sick. But at least now he had the truth. At least now he knew where they stood. "I don't know what to say to you right now," Ryan said, his voice barely a whisper. "How do I even begin to process this?" Rebecca's sobs filled the room, but Ryan couldn't bring himself to comfort her. "Not yet. I don't want your apologies, Rebecca. I want to know if this is even worth saving. I need to know if you still care about me. If you even care about this family anymore." Rebecca looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and guilt. "I do care, Ryan. I do. But I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing. Please don't leave me." Ryan felt his heart twist. Part of him wanted to walk out that door, to never look back. But another part of him, the part that loved her, that had built a life with her, was still clinging to hope. Could they fix this? Could they rebuild after everything that had happened? But before he could answer, a knock came at the door. Ryan turned, confused. Who could it be at this hour? He went to the door and opened it, only to be met by a tall man with a grim expression. The man was holding a folder, and Ryan immediately recognized him as one of the private investigators he'd hired last week. The investigator's eyes flicked to Ryan, then to Rebecca, and Ryan could see the tension in his posture. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the investigator said, "but I have something you need to see." Ryan's stomach churned. What could this be? Another piece of the puzzle? Or something even worse? Without a word, Ryan stepped aside, and the investigator walked in, handing him the folder. As Ryan flipped it open, his blood ran cold. Inside were pictures, clear, unambiguous pictures of Rebecca and Adam, caught in compromising positions. The images were taken over the past few months, from different locations, showing the extent of their affair. Ryan's hand trembled as he looked through the photos. The truth was now undeniable. "How did you get these?" Ryan asked, his voice trembling with anger. "I've been following up on the information you gave me," the investigator said quietly. "I thought you should know exactly what's been going on." Rebecca gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Ryan, please. I didn't know they were taking pictures. Please don't." But Ryan couldn't listen anymore. The last bit of trust he had left had been shredded in an instant. The betrayal was too much to bear. "You really think you can just fix this with a few words? With a few tears?" Ryan spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You lied to me for months. You've been lying to me for years. Rebecca, you think I'm just supposed to pretend it never happened?" Rebecca's eyes widened, and she took a step back, but Ryan was done. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about everything she had done to destroy him, his trust, his family, their future. "Don't follow me," Ryan said, his voice steely. "I'm done." He grabbed his keys and walked out the door, leaving Rebecca standing there in the middle of their home. The house that was supposed to be their safe place now felt like a prison. And Ryan wasn't sure if he would ever be able to escape the suffocating grip of betrayal. Ryan's footsteps echoed down the quiet suburban street as he walked away from the house. His mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and confusion. The pictures, the lies, it was all too much to process in the moment. He couldn't even look back at the house that had once been his safe haven. The place where he thought they'd built a life together now felt like a cage. The cold night air hit his face, but it did nothing to numb the sting in his chest. He needed space. He needed answers. And he needed to get away from Rebecca, from the weight of it all. He made his way to his car, hands shaking, not caring that he had no real destination in mind. The only thing that mattered right now was getting away from everything. He slammed the door shut and sat there for a few moments, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm the storm inside him. But as the minutes passed, a wave of realization started to sink in. What now? What came after the confrontation, after the truth had been revealed? Could he really walk away from his marriage? Could he abandon the life they'd built together, no matter how much it hurt? Ryan started the engine, driving aimlessly through the streets, the lights of Portland flickering past him like ghosts. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and for a moment he almost didn't want to answer. But when he saw Rebecca's name on the screen, his heart twisted. He hit the button, and her voice came through, small and desperate. "Ryan, please, can we talk? I know I've made a huge mistake, but I love you. Please, just let me explain everything." He didn't say anything for a long moment, just listening to her voice crack through the phone. The pain in her words was evident, but it didn't change what had happened. "I can't do this right now, Rebecca," he finally said, his voice tight. "I need time." There was silence on the other end, and he could hear her trying to hold back tears. "Please, Ryan," she whispered, barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." But Ryan didn't respond. He just hung up, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat as he sped down the empty streets. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to feel. Part of him wanted to believe her, to think that maybe they could fix this, but the other part, the part that had been deceived, couldn't let it go. As the days passed, Ryan's internal conflict grew worse. He stayed with his friend Mark, crashing on his couch for a few nights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rebecca's face, her tears, the way she had looked at him in that moment. She was begging him to forgive her, but Ryan wasn't sure if he could. Meanwhile, Rebecca seemed to spiral. She called him constantly, sent texts, left messages on his voicemail. She apologized over and over again, promising she would do anything to fix things. But Ryan could hear the desperation in her voice, and he wasn't sure if it was the truth, or just a last-ditch effort to salvage what she had ruined. Ryan knew he couldn't keep avoiding the truth. He had to decide what he wanted. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that no matter how much pain he felt, no matter how much he loved her, he couldn't forgive her just like that. Trust, once broken, didn't just heal overnight. One evening, Ryan finally returned to the house. He'd spent the day thinking, trying to clear his head, but he couldn't escape it. He had to face Rebecca. He had to end this, or find a way to move forward. He stood outside the door for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Rebecca was sitting on the couch, her face pale and red from crying. The house was still, the silence felt heavy. Ryan didn't waste any time. "I can't do this anymore, Rebecca," he said quietly. His voice was steady, though his heart was pounding. "I need to know if you're really sorry, or if you're just sorry you got caught." Rebecca looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Ryan, please don't say that. You don't understand. Adam was a mistake. A huge mistake. But I love you. I always have." Ryan shook his head, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "Love? You love me? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back. And now you want me to believe that you love me? You destroyed everything. You destroyed our family." Rebecca stood up, walking towards him, her hands reaching out. "Ryan, I know I've made the worst mistake of my life, but please, I'm begging you, don't throw everything away. We can work through this. We can fix it." Ryan stepped back, his face hard. "How do you fix something like this, Rebecca? How do you fix the trust you've shattered? How do you take back the lies, the betrayal?" Rebecca's face crumpled as she let out a sob. "I don't know, Ryan. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm willing to try. Please, just give me one more chance." Ryan stood there, staring at her. Part of him wanted to reach out, to hold her and tell her it would be okay. But he knew he couldn't. Not this time. The damage had been done. "I can't forgive you," Ryan said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." The words felt heavy as they left his mouth, but they were the truth. And as much as it hurt, he knew they were the right words. Rebecca collapsed into the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. Ryan stood there, watching her for a moment, before turning away. He walked out the door, leaving her behind, and for the first time, he felt like he was walking away from a life he once knew. The end of the beginning. Ryan's days after that were a blur. The pain of his decision lingered, but so did the anger. The betrayal was still raw, and every time he thought about Rebecca, about the lies, it felt like a punch to the gut. But amidst the turmoil, Ryan started to find clarity. He spent time with his daughter, Sophie, trying to shield her from the chaos around them. He knew he needed to stay strong, not just for himself, but for her too. Rebecca continued to call, to message, to beg for forgiveness. But Ryan couldn't let himself fall back into the same cycle of lies. He couldn't risk it again. And then, one day, things took an unexpected turn. The last person Ryan expected to show up at his door was Adam, the man who had been the catalyst for this entire mess. Ryan had barely closed the door behind him when he heard the knock. It was forceful, urgent, as if someone had been waiting outside, gathering the courage to face him. He froze, hands still on the doorknob, not knowing whether to open it or walk away. But before he could decide, the knock came again, louder this time. Reluctantly, he turned the handle and swung the door open. Standing on his doorstep was none other than Adam, the man who had been secretly seeing his wife for months. Ryan's gut tightened with anger, but he held himself back. There was no room for violence, no room for reckless decisions. "What are you doing here?" Ryan's voice was cold, controlled, surprisingly calm considering the storm brewing inside him. Adam stepped back slightly, his hands raised defensively. He looked nervous, like a man who knew he was about to face the consequences of his actions. His eyes darted to Ryan's, then quickly to the ground. I need to talk to you," Adam stammered. His voice cracked slightly. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I need to explain myself." Ryan narrowed his eyes. "Explain yourself? You've already done enough explaining, don't you think?" Adam seemed to hesitate, but then he took a step forward. "I know what I did was wrong, and I know I'm the reason you're hurting. But there's something you need to understand. I didn't want it to happen, Ryan. It just did." Ryan's blood ran cold at the words. Just did. It was the same excuse Rebecca had given him. It was the excuse everyone used when they knew they couldn't justify their actions. But Ryan wasn't about to let Adam off that easy. "No, you didn't just do it," Ryan spat. "You made a choice, Adam. You knew what you were doing, and you did it anyway." Adam took a deep breath, his face pale. "You're right," he admitted. "I can't change what happened, but I want you to know something. I never meant for it to go this far. Rebecca, she's been going through things. She didn't feel seen at home. I was there for her when she needed someone." The words hit Ryan like a slap. She didn't feel seen at home. The way Adam was talking made it sound like he was just some kind of knight in shining armor swooping in to save her from her misery. But the truth was clear. Adam was just taking advantage of her pain. "Is that supposed to make this okay?" Ryan's voice shook with the force of his anger. "You don't get to just waltz in and fix things. You think because you gave her attention that makes it all better? That makes her cheating okay?" Adam opened his mouth to respond, but Ryan didn't give him a chance. "No, don't even try to explain yourself. You're not the one who has to live with the aftermath of all this. I'm the one who's been betrayed. I'm the one who has to figure out how to explain this to my daughter." Adam's face fell, and he looked genuinely regretful. But Ryan wasn't interested in his apologies anymore. The damage had already been done, and nothing Adam could say would take it back. "You don't have to say anything else," Ryan said quietly. "Just leave. I don't want to hear it." Adam nodded, his expression pained, but he didn't argue. He turned and walked down the porch steps, disappearing into the night. Ryan stood there, watching him go, feeling his heart beat faster in his chest. It wasn't just anger that was boiling inside him anymore. It was a deep, aching sorrow, the kind that could swallow a man whole if he wasn't careful. He closed the door with a slow, deliberate motion, then leaned against it, closing his eyes for a moment. This was it. His life would never be the same. There was no going back to the way things were, and he didn't know what the future held. But for now, all he could do was focus on the aftermath of the storm, the shattering realization. Days passed, but the weight of what had happened didn't ease up. Ryan's mind was consumed with thoughts of Rebecca, the affair, Adam, and the life they'd built together. The pain was relentless, an invisible wound that wouldn't heal no matter how much he tried to move past it. Every moment was a reminder of what had been lost, and no matter how much he tried to focus on work or his daughter, everything kept coming back to the betrayal. But then, just as he was starting to settle into the quiet chaos of his new reality, Rebecca called again. This time, there was no anger in her voice. There was only pleading. "Ryan, please," she said, the tears barely contained in her voice. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you. Please give me one more chance. I love you, and I want to fix this. I'll do anything." Ryan closed his eyes, his fist clenching around the phone. Do anything? It had always been the same with her. Words, promises, and then nothing. She had lied to him for months. And now, when everything was exposed, she wanted to fix it? Was it really that easy? He shook his head, struggling to hold back the bitter laugh that threatened to escape his lips. "Rebecca, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And I'm not sure I even want to." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, Rebecca spoke again, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything. I know I can't undo the past, but please, please don't let it end like this." Ryan sat in silence, unsure of what to say. He couldn't make sense of it anymore. His love for her was still there, buried beneath the anger and the hurt, but it was hard to believe that things could ever be the same. The betrayal had poisoned everything. The trust was gone. And without that, there was nothing left to hold on to. "Rebecca," he said quietly, finally finding his voice, "I don't know if I can forgive you, and I don't know if I can keep doing this. But I'm not ready to make any decisions yet." Rebecca let out a shaky breath, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for even considering it." But Ryan didn't feel relieved. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something he couldn't control, staring down into a deep, dark void. A new beginning or a final goodbye? The following weeks passed in a blur of emotions, tension, and painful decisions. Ryan and Rebecca barely spoke. The anger was still there, but so was the sadness. The affair had done more than break their trust. It had shattered their entire foundation. And now, both of them were left to pick up the pieces, unsure of whether it was worth it to rebuild or to walk away for good. As much as Ryan wanted answers, there was no easy solution. He had to decide if he could live with the pain, or if he had already reached the point of no return. Could he truly move past the betrayal? Was there hope for their marriage, or had everything been broken beyond repair? Ryan spent more time with Sophie, trying to shield her from the storm that was raging inside him. She was too young to understand what was happening, but he couldn't help but feel guilty for exposing her to any of it. He wanted to protect her from the hurt, but at the same time, he knew that the truth would eventually come out. But the question remained, could they come back from this? Ryan stood in his living room, staring at the mess of his life scattered across the floor. The house had been their home for years, the place where he had envisioned a future with Rebecca, the place where he thought their family would grow old together. But now it was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. His thoughts were a constant battle between anger and sorrow, regret and hope. The photos of Rebecca and Adam still haunted him. The text messages, the lies, they played in his mind on a never-ending loop. And yet, in his quieter moments, when Sophie was asleep and the house was still, he found himself wondering, was this really the end? Could he somehow forgive Rebecca and rebuild what they had? Or had the trust been shattered beyond repair? His phone buzzed on the table. Ryan hesitated before picking it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw Rebecca's name on the screen. He had ignored her calls for days now, not knowing what to say. What could he possibly say? What could fix the devastation they had caused? He swiped the screen to answer, his voice cold as he said, "Rebecca." "Ryan, I don't know what to do." Rebecca's voice cracked, strained with emotion. "I know I've hurt you more than I ever thought possible, but I can't lose you. I can't lose our family." Ryan closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. Her words stung, but part of him still wanted to believe her. That was the problem, wasn't it? He wanted to believe that love could fix this, but he also knew the truth. Love wasn't enough if it was built on lies. "I don't know if I can believe you anymore, Rebecca," Ryan said softly. "I don't know if I can trust you again. You broke something inside me, and I don't know how to fix it." Rebecca let out a sharp breath, the desperation in her voice growing. "Ryan, I've been to therapy. I've been working through everything. I know I messed up, but I'm doing everything I can to make things right. You have to know that. I want to make this work. I want to fight for us." Ryan gripped the phone tighter, fighting the surge of emotions rushing through him. His mind was a battlefield between his heart, which ached for the woman he had once trusted, and his brain, which screamed that he was better off walking away. He didn't know if he was ready to forgive her, or if he would ever be able to look at her the same way again. "I'm not sure I can keep doing this," he said quietly. "I need space, Rebecca. I need to figure out what I want, what's best for me and Sophie." Rebecca didn't respond immediately, and the silence between them felt unbearable. Finally, she whispered, "I understand, Ryan, but I'll wait for you. I'll wait as long as it takes." Ryan hung up, setting the phone down with a heavy sigh. Part of him wanted to run after her, to grab her and tell her it was all going to be okay. But the other part of him knew that nothing could fix what had been broken. The next few days were a blur of tension. Ryan threw himself into his work, trying to bury his thoughts about Rebecca and the affair beneath deadlines and meetings. But it wasn't enough to escape the gnawing pain that lingered just beneath the surface. He spent his nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was making the right choice. And then, the unexpected happened. Adam showed up again. Ryan had just gotten home from work when he heard the knock. It wasn't a polite tap, but a forceful, urgent knock. At first, he thought it might be a mistake, some sales rep or solicitor. But when he opened the door, there stood Adam, looking visibly shaken. "What are you doing here?" Ryan asked, his voice stiff with the remnants of anger that hadn't yet subsided. Adam paused, swallowing hard. "I know I'm the last person you want to talk to, but there's something I need to tell you. Something you don't know." Ryan took a step back, unsure of what to make of Adam's sudden visit. The last time he'd seen him, Adam had left without a word, but now he seemed different, vulnerable even. What could you possibly have to say that would make any difference? Ryan's voice was thick with skepticism. Adam took a deep breath and stepped forward, lowering his voice. "It's about Rebecca," he said, his eyes filled with guilt. "I don't know if she's told you this yet, but there's more to the story, more than you know." Ryan's blood ran cold. He had thought he knew everything. He'd seen the photos, read the messages. But now Adam was telling him there was more? Ryan didn't know whether to believe him or throw him out of the house. "Just tell me what the hell you're talking about," Ryan demanded, his patience thinning. Adam looked around nervously, as if making sure no one was listening. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Rebecca didn't just fall into this. I mean, yes, she was vulnerable, but there's something you don't know about her past. Something that explains why she made the choices she did." Ryan stood frozen, every muscle tense. "What are you saying?" "Rebecca had an affair before," Adam said, his words coming out in a rush. "It was a few years ago, before you and she even got married. She never told you, but it was someone close to her, someone you probably know." Ryan's mind reeled. What was he talking about? Who? Adam hesitated for a long time before answering. "Her brother, Sean. She had an affair with him before you guys even met. I know this sounds crazy, but it's the truth. Rebecca never told you because she was ashamed, and I think that's part of why she couldn't deal with her feelings when we started seeing each other." It all came flooding back. The air left Ryan's lungs as he took a step back. His thoughts scrambled to process what Adam was saying. An affair with her brother? It sounded absurd, like something out of a twisted nightmare. "No," Ryan whispered, shaking his head. "That can't be true." But Adam looked him straight in the eye. "I'm sorry, Ryan, but it is. And I think it's why Rebecca's been so distant, why she's been making such bad decisions. She's been running from her own demons for years." The room seemed to tilt as Ryan staggered back, his world suddenly crashing down around him. The betrayal was already unbearable. But now, it felt like the very foundation of everything he knew had crumbled into dust. Ryan's mind raced as Adam's words continued to echo in his ears. Her brother. The very idea felt wrong, twisted, and beyond anything he could have imagined. How could Rebecca have kept something like that from him for all these years? And why had Adam decided to tell him now, of all times? Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his breath shallow. The air felt thick in his lungs, and every thought seemed to blur together. He wanted to scream. He wanted to confront Rebecca right then and there, to demand answers, but part of him feared what would happen if he did. How much more could he take? He looked at Adam, who was standing there, clearly uncomfortable under Ryan's glare, but resolute. "Are you serious?" Ryan finally croaked, his voice low with disbelief. "You're telling me that Rebecca had an affair with her own brother, and you think that's the reason she did what she did with you?" Adam nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, I know it sounds insane, but I think it explains everything. Why she's been so messed up, why she's been pushing you away. She's been hiding from this, Ryan." And I don't think you ever knew. Ryan staggered back, his head spinning. This can't be real, he thought. This doesn't make sense. And yet, a small part of him couldn't deny the pieces were starting to fall into place. Rebecca's distance, her defensiveness, her struggle to open up. Maybe it was all tied to something darker, something she had been keeping buried for years. For a moment, the room was silent, only the distant hum of traffic outside breaking the stillness. Ryan took a step toward Adam, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice strained. "Why didn't you come forward earlier? Why did you have to get involved in my marriage at all?" Adam lowered his eyes, guilt written across his face. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to be the one to bring this up. But I think you deserve the truth. Rebecca has been carrying this secret for too long, and I couldn't just stand by and watch her destroy everything. I couldn't be a part of her hiding it anymore." Ryan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "So you think telling me all of this is supposed to make it better?" he demanded. "You think you're doing the right thing, telling me this now? I don't care about your excuses, Adam. You've ruined my life. You've ruined my family." Adam's shoulders slumped, and he took a step back. "I'm sorry. I never wanted it to go this far." Ryan turned away, his mind racing as he processed everything Adam had said. Her brother. It was the kind of betrayal that went beyond anything Ryan could have prepared for. Every moment he had spent with Rebecca, every conversation, every laugh, every "I love you," now felt like a lie. How could I ever trust her again? The thought echoed in his mind, and for the first time in his life, Ryan felt completely alone. No matter how much he wanted to reach out to someone, no matter how many people were trying to help him through this, the pain of betrayal felt like a wall he couldn't climb. But Adam's confession had changed everything. There were no more questions about the affair. There were only answers. But with those answers came even more pain. And now Ryan had to figure out how to move forward. Was it even possible to forgive Rebecca? Was it possible to rebuild what they had? The showdown. Ryan decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to confront Rebecca. He couldn't let this drag on any longer. He had to hear her side of the story once and for all. He needed to know the truth no matter how much it tore him apart. He called her. This time he didn't hesitate. When she picked up, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Rebecca," he said, his voice icy. "We need to talk." She was quiet for a moment, then replied, "I know. I've been waiting for you to come home so we could talk. I'm sorry, Ryan. I know I've made a huge mistake. Please let me explain." Ryan didn't give her a chance to finish. "No, you're not explaining anything anymore. I already know everything. Adam told me." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For a moment, Ryan almost thought the call had dropped. But then Rebecca spoke again, her voice small, almost pleading. "You talked to Adam? You talked to him about everything?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Ryan said, his jaw set. "He told me everything. About the affair with your brother. About why you've been so messed up. About why you did what you did." Rebecca didn't respond right away. Ryan could hear her breathing, but she didn't speak. He could feel the tension rising between them, could almost taste the regret that was hanging thick in the air. Finally, Rebecca spoke again, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry, Ryan. I never meant to hurt you like this. But I didn't know how to deal with it. I thought if I could just ignore it, if I could bury it, maybe I could move on." "Bury it?" Ryan's voice grew louder, his anger flaring again. "You buried your brother in your past, and now it's all coming back to haunt us. You buried your mistakes, Rebecca, and I'm paying for them." There was a long pause before Rebecca spoke again. "I never told you because I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "But I'm realizing now that keeping it a secret, hiding it, it's only hurt you more." Ryan's breath was ragged now, his hands shaking as he gripped the phone. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep pretending everything's okay. I don't know if I can keep living in this lie." Rebecca's voice cracked. "Ryan, please. I'm asking you for a chance. I'm asking you to let me fix this. Let me show you that I'm not that person anymore. I want to rebuild. I love you. Ryan closed his eyes, his pulse racing. The words hung heavy between them, but they didn't sound the same anymore. I love you. How many times had he heard that before? How many times had she said it, only for it to be broken by lies? I don't know, Rebecca, Ryan said, his voice breaking. I want to believe you. I really do. But I can't. Not after everything. Rebecca's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. And in that moment, Ryan knew. He couldn't keep doing this. He couldn't keep pretending that things would go back to normal. The truth was too much to bear. The lies were too deep. Ryan's world had changed. His family, his trust, everything he thought was solid was now in pieces. And though he was left with a sense of loss, there was also something else. Something that felt like a faint glimmer of hope. The road ahead was unclear, and the pain was fresh, but Ryan had made his decision. The aftermath of betrayal was never easy to deal with, but it was a journey he now had to take. He didn't know if reconciliation was possible, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer willing to live a lie. Ryan hung up the phone, his chest tight, his mind numb. The words Rebecca had said still echoed in his head, and the weight of them felt suffocating. I love you. Those words, so familiar, yet now they rang hollow. How could he believe them after everything that had happened? The betrayal, the lies, the secrets that had been buried for so long. It was all too much to process. He looked around the house one last time, the place they had built together. It felt different now, like a house with no foundation, a place he couldn't return to. His eyes lingered on Sophie's empty room. She hadn't fully understood what was going on. Thank God. But Ryan knew that one day, she would ask questions. And when that time came, what would he tell her? How could he explain why their family had fallen apart? But as he stood there, something started to shift within him. It wasn't a feeling of relief or closure. Not yet, at least. But it was something more subtle, something that gave him a sense of strength. I'm not going to let this define me. He wasn't going to let the lies and betrayal take away everything that mattered to him. He had to move on. The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it felt impossible. But as the days passed, Ryan began to realize that maybe the only way to heal was to let go. Let go of Rebecca. Let go of the life he thought they would have. And in doing so, maybe he could start building something new. A new life for himself and Sophie, one that was rooted in honesty and strength. The final confrontation with Rebecca. After weeks of avoiding the inevitable, Ryan knew he had to face Rebecca one last time. He couldn't keep running from this, couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay. The last thing he wanted was to drag this out, but the truth was he needed closure. For his sake, for Sophie's. They met at a park, a neutral ground, away from the house that now felt like a battlefield. Rebecca was already sitting on a bench when Ryan arrived, her eyes red from crying. When she saw him, she stood up, her hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry, she said immediately, her voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry, Ryan. I never wanted to hurt you like this. Ryan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew would be the hardest conversation of his life. I know you're sorry, Rebecca, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. But sorry isn't enough anymore. Rebecca's face crumpled, and she looked down at her feet, as if the weight of the world had fallen on her. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But please know that I've been trying to change. I've been going to therapy, Ryan. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. Ryan nodded slowly, his gaze distant as he looked out at the park. I know, he said. I know you're trying, but it doesn't change what happened. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And no matter how much we both want to fix it, we can't undo the damage. Rebecca's voice trembled. But we have a daughter. We've been through so much together. Don't you think that counts for something? Ryan turned to look at her, his eyes filled with sadness. Of course it counts. But it's not enough anymore, Rebecca. Not for me. Not for Sophie. There was a long silence between them, and Ryan could feel the finality of it all settling in. He wasn't angry anymore. The anger had faded, replaced by something else. A quiet sadness, maybe even a sense of relief. It was over. This chapter of his life was closed. "I'm going to take care of Sophie," Ryan said, his voice firm now. "I'm going to make sure she's okay. I'll make sure she knows she's loved, and I'll raise her right. But you and I, we're done." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. Ryan could see the heartbreak in her eyes, the same heartbreak he had felt for so long. But the truth was, it was too late. They had both hurt each other too much to go back. "I'm sorry, Ryan," Rebecca whispered again, her voice barely audible. Ryan didn't respond immediately. He just nodded and turned to walk away, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. But as he walked toward his car, something shifted inside him. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something important, something real. "I'm moving forward." The months after that meeting weren't easy. Ryan faced challenges every day as he navigated the complexities of single parenthood, rebuilding his life and healing from the wounds of the past. But despite the pain, there was also growth. Ryan learned how to be strong again, how to find his own voice and make decisions that were best for him and his daughter. As for Rebecca, she struggled with her own journey. After Ryan left, she tried to rebuild her life. But the truth was, it was never going to be the same. She had lost the trust of the one person she had once loved, and no matter how much therapy she went through or how many apologies she made, there were some things that couldn't be fixed. Ryan focused on Sophie, giving her the stability and love she needed, and slowly, their lives began to heal. Sophie adjusted to her new life, and while there were moments of sadness, there were also moments of joy. Moments when Ryan realized that despite everything, they were going to be okay. A year later, Ryan sat at a small table in a coffee shop, a smile tugging at his lips as he looked at Sophie. She had just received an award for her academic achievements at school, and her eyes sparkled with pride. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," Ryan said, his voice filled with warmth. Sophie beamed. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." Ryan's heart swelled with pride as he watched her. She had grown so much, and he knew that no matter what the future held, they would always have each other. As he walked out of the coffee shop, the sun setting behind them, Ryan realized something important. "I'm going to be okay." There was no more running, no more hiding. The past was behind him, and the future was ahead, filled with possibilities. Thanks for sticking with us through this intense journey. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't miss out on our future videos. There's always more to come. Take care, and I'll see you next time.